much, Your Honour, for the speech. There was a slip on the motorway, so I'm sorry I was a little bit late. Very sorry. I would have loved to have been, and I'm very grateful that it's been videoed, so I look forward to hearing this a bit later. Thank you, Stephen. So, moving right along, the review of the Charities Act could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a world-leading framework for charity law for New Zealand, as we discussed yesterday. But also, as we discussed yesterday, there are significant issues that I think that this is acknowledged with the nature, scope and timing of the review. To discuss the emerging issues and implications of the review, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel this morning. Steve Kerr is a policy manager in the policy group of the Department of Internal Affairs and one of the review team for the review of the Charities Act. There is a slight change in the program. We were to have Donna Flavel, who is the Chief Executive of the Waikato Iwi, commonly known as Waikato Tainui. Donna is a member of the core reference group, but is unable to join us today, and fortunately, Gwen Kerr, who is a legal advisor to the post-settlement governance entity for Waikato Tainui, is able to join us. Welcome, Gwen, thank you. This substantial charity holds over $1.3 billion in assets. Waikato Tainui is committed to building the capacity of its iwi, hapu, marae and tribal members. Waikato Lands and River Trusts manage tribal affairs, implement the tribe's development strategy and make distributions for education, health, well-being, marae, social and cultural development. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Matthew Turner, who is a chairman of the legal practice in Brisbane, Australia, known as Newman and Turner Lawyers. And in December 2017, Dr. Turner was appointed by the Commonwealth of Australia to be one of the 4 panellists to undertake the review of the Australian charities and not-for-profits legislation. The committee's report was made publicly available in August last year. So I'd like to, without further ado, welcome Steve. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Steve Kerr tōku ingoa. I don't have slides, but I'm the policy manager at DIA, as Sue said, responsible for the review for modernising the Charities Act, as we call it. I'm just going to give a sort of 10-minute update on the progress with that piece of work, consultation meetings, what we're hearing, and where things are heading in terms of the legislative review to follow. Quick bit of background. I'm sure a lot of you will know this, but the government announced the review last year. We launched the consultation about 7 weeks ago. I'm sure many of you, I hope many of you have seen the public discussion document that's released. We might bring down some copies at lunch so that you can take them away if you don't have them already. And since then, over the last few weeks, we've been doing a roadshow of consultation meetings, and Sue's been a part of that. And we've done 25 meetings from Whangarei to Invercargill. We've found the level of discussion and debate at those meetings, the level of engagement has been really great. You know, at least as good as we expected, probably better than we expected. It's just reinforced to me how critical it is in a process like this for bureaucrats like me to get out of Wellington, get on the road and hear from people in their own words about how they see things working and what their immediate concerns are and what their thoughts are about the bigger picture. So I think that's probably my first reflection, just that it's been a great level of engagement, really positive process so far. One other comment on the way that we're running the meetings I think's been sort of notable. We've approached the roadshow as a collaboration really, so as policy officials from DIA, we're sharing the platform with Sue, and also Dave Henderson, who you heard from yesterday, who's up here, sort of speaking on behalf of the sector, and offering their views on the issues at play. And that means that people at the meetings are really hearing contrasting views, and that's triggered really good debate and sort of robust exchanges, if you like. And a lot of people have told us they appreciate that approach to consultation meetings, so that's also been really positive. And certainly, while there's some concern about kind of chilling effect in New Zealand around charity advocacy, at the meetings, no one seems to hold back in terms of sharing their views about the problems as they see them. We've also had a lot of positive feedback too about the way things are operating. So in terms of the emerging issues, I think just firstly bear in mind, talking here about issues we're hearing from the floor at these meetings. We haven't received written submissions yet, so certainly probably get a different flavour in terms of emphasis and issues at meetings out in the community. But there has been a lot of comment about the time available to make submissions and the timeline of review in general. So 9 weeks for consultation is not enough. People probably predictably aren't engaging fully in some of these issues until they come to the meetings and hear the presentations. So as you heard from the Minister yesterday, that time frame has been extended out to 31 May, and we should now be able to take more time with the policy work and the legislative work to follow too. So that's great news. Second theme, again, this isn't surprising, but it's come through really consistently, which is Tier 4 charities. Small charities are struggling with the reporting standards, the financial reporting in particular. So those standards are still relatively new, and of course they are tiered so that smaller charities have lower requirements than large charities, but they're still too difficult for a lot of small groups, not all of them. And those, what we're hearing as well is, directly from people themselves, that the difficulties with reporting standards are happening in the context of struggling small organisations, volunteer time, a lot of other compliance issues or requirements from funders and local government or other agencies. A third issue, and this is related to that, is just we're hearing a lot from charities that they need more support, more guidance, training, capacity building work, more resources, and I think I would say on top of that, or in addition to that, probably better coordination and more signposting towards the resources that are actually out there. We heard yesterday about CommunityNet and even the resources on the Charity Services website. Some people aren't aware of and aren't making use of. So that's a key theme. I suspect a little bit of public investment in that kind of area will probably see really, really great results. And it has been interesting as well, just observing in different cities and towns as we go around, the level of local coordination, which is quite patchy, but it really does make a difference having people on the ground who have a role kind of bringing the sector together. Fourth thing that's resonated with people is business. So we're not in a consultation document really proposing or talking about any radical changes there, but the very fact that we've included in the document and talking about it has what's the word, maybe spooked some people. So a really strong message that business is a really key way that charities fundraise in New Zealand. Don't touch our businesses, sort of message. So we've heard that. And finally, last but not least, of course, advocacy. It's really resonated with people coming to meetings, the ones that I've attended. There's a lot of interest in Greenpeace and Family First decisions. Not necessarily, deep engagement with the particulars of the cases and the assessment of public benefit and so on, but a clear sense that charities feel like they might be risking something by speaking up, and that's not a good thing. Of course, there's a mix of things going on there. Some of it's to do with, concern about damaging relationship with funders and so on. But it's clearly a key part of the idea of charities for people. Lastly, I just want to run through a couple of the emerging implications, challenges. I think I had implications is a better word. I think one of the interesting developments, which you may have picked up on and run through already, one of the interesting developments for us is that a lot of the key issues that are front of mind, burning issues for people, aren't to do with the Act, aren't actually to do with legislation. This is at community meetings, I should say. We haven't heard the submission, so just repeat that. But things like reporting standards are actually set under different legislation, and all the issues around support and capacity building obviously aren't necessarily things we try to fix through legislation in the first instance. So there is a challenge there, aside from looking at legislation, in terms of the way that government coordinates its support and its relationship with the sector, and a challenge for the sector in terms of the way it's coordinated too. And hopefully we can build more of a partnership. We have, challenge, I think, as policy officials to really get to grips and understand these compliance challenges and how they play out day to day for charities in their work, how the charities legislation works alongside other legislation and requirements from funders and so on. So we'll continue to work with the sector, but also with officials in IR and MB and so on to try and align things as much as possible. You know, I'm sure officials are always saying that, and it's not as easy as it sounds, but it is a key driver and a key consideration for us. Lastly, we've got a lot more work to do in the review team. I just want to say to the organisers of this conference, it's been fantastic. The timing could not have been better for us. We're just starting to kind of dive deeper into the policy issues, and the agenda's been incredibly useful for us. Advocacy tax, PSGEs and Te Māori, governance standards, all these issues that we're thinking about have come up. And to hear from both from practitioners but also from academics with more of a theoretical and international perspective has been great for us. So thank you. And very final thing, just an observation about the fact that, we're on the road and sometimes at these meetings we get differences of views and differences of opinions, sometimes kind of opposing positions, and sometimes we're just kind of somehow furiously agreeing with each other about things where we've got a slightly different view about how to move forward. But I really appreciate that fundamentally everyone's on the same page and shares a kind of vision about having a really effective sector, making people's lives better in New Zealand and in Australia and around the world actually, and that's what is at the heart of the charity sector. So that's I just think it's important to bear that in mind as we hear these debates, and it's a really positive thing. So that's me. Kia ora, thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Can you hear me on my mic? I will wander around because if I stand behind the left turn, I'm only hobbit sized, so it doesn't really work for me. We do have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to run that through quickly. We, at Waikato Tainui, I'm a legal advisor at Waikato Tainui, so my background is I am a lawyer, no one's perfect. And essentially we thought we'd run you through how we're looking at this review from our perspective, particularly from the Te Ao Māori perspective. So first of all, to talk to you about a post-settlement governance entity. This is the organisation that is set up and has its genesis in a treaty settlement with the Crown to represent a specific iwi that has a mandate to represent tribal members in New Zealand. So Waikato Tainui, Ngāi Tahu, those kinds of names. I'm sure you're familiar with that. We are a registered charity as a group. We're a slightly different looking animal to a lot of your charitable clients for all the reasons that Justice Williams has already discussed. Within our structure, we are an incorporated society underpinned by trust documents and running a number of companies. So from a legal perspective, that's why I want to work there. It's fascinating. And all of the issues that we look at in this sector, for us, particularly charity and tax, are two sides of the same coin to us, and how we structure our affairs is very much underpinned by these kinds of policy considerations. So we've obviously settled with the Crown as a treaty partner, and the first thing we would say as our expectation is that in terms of the review and timing issues, we are disappointed we're not talking about the charitable purposes definition in the Act. For all the reasons that Justice Williams has pointed out. It is hard to imagine a less relevant test in the law. The only other body of law we have in New Zealand that's similarly ancient would be trust law. That dates back to the 11th century and the Crusades. So in charities we're slightly more modern by getting forward into the 1500s. But it really doesn't work particularly well. Now we've figured out how to work with that in a PSG context, but it's very difficult for a lot of Māori-based smaller community charities who are trying to squish themselves into those heads. So we have over 76,000 tribal members to take care of. The settlement funds that we've received, we never intended to fully compensate those people for the social, economic, cultural deprivations they have suffered as a result of the raupatu, which is the land confiscations somewhere like the Waikato. So our expectation is that is only seed money that we are to grow so that we can assist those people to recover from the effects of colonisation. Now, the only way we can grow that is to run businesses. So I think you can feel where I'm headed with that particular remark. We are trying to effect intergenerational change. So as a charity, we make decisions looking forward 500 and 600 years. Most of your clients in the charitable space are not looking at things with such an enormously long lens, and I've worked with an enormous number of New Zealand charities in my time, but I have never been asked to consider how that's going to look in 500 or 600 years' time before joining the tribe. And that's a big job. That redress is a really big job. It's complicated, and that takes a lot of flexibility within our structure so that we can do the things we need to do. And from a Te Ao Māori perspective, you'll hear about mana motuhake, the ability to self-determine. You'll talk about mana whakahaere, which is the ability to do what you want to do with your assets. In terms of perpetual stewardship, which was the kaitiaka point that Justice Williams was talking about. So we've talked about the review and timing issues. There simply isn't enough time for people to reply meaningfully to the survey document that has been sent out to us. It's very difficult to get a steer on what the actual policy reasons are for some of these things. It's just put to you as a series of questions. So you will be receiving a fulsome submission from us with our thoughts on all of those survey questions. We wonder whether there is now a case for PSGs to have an alternative regime to the charities regime in New Zealand, because we are so different. We don't solicit public donations, we have an intergenerational lens, we must apply tikanga to our work. We look very different to all the other kids, and so we're wondering whether a first principles review would elicit the response from us that there should actually be an entirely new thing called a PSGE governance regime, and that we would be happy to give you our remarks about that. Accumulation simply doesn't work in a 500 to 600 year context. We accumulate funds because we need them to last for a really, really long time, and we need to respond to things that we don't even know about yet. And so an accumulation rule for us wouldn't work well. We are constrained by our structure, however, and as Justice Williams pointed out, if we're not giving enough money out to our people, they simply vote in new governors who will. So we are peculiarly restrained by our structure. We can't just have a pot of money that we sit on. Our people won't tolerate that. So we're already constrained in that regard, and we certainly don't feel that any accumulation rule is likely to take into account the sorts of things that we need to think about. We think it's likely to be ethnocentric and not to really recognise how we want to accumulate and why we need to accumulate those funds. I think you already know how I feel about any fooling around with the idea that perhaps our businesses should pay tax. From our perspective, our work is to try and compensate the descendants of those who suffered the raupatu. We need to make it as easy as possible for us to use the very small amount of money that was given to us at settlement to help those generations come out of intergenerational poverty and overrepresentation and all sorts of negative statistics in modern day Aotearoa. So as long as we're spending our money on those charitable things, our view is how we get there is really not the point. The point is, what do we spend them on at the end of the day, and that should be the test. So if you ultimately spend that money doing charitable things, that's just fine from our perspective. We can't grow our money any other way. It is a full and final settlement. We are responsible for stewarding that money. We have to grow it. Advocacy from a Te Ao Māori perspective, one would immediately say, of course you don't mean that we can't hold the Crown to account for its obligations under the treaty, and the fact that the Crown needs to be kept on track in that regard, and will wander off the ranch if not watched closely and shepherded back into compliance. So we would certainly say we see no particular problem with advocacy at all in a modern democratic society. Why shouldn't people advocate for their position? And quite often from a charitable perspective, to achieve what you want, you need to change the law. We know that. One only needs to consider that it was the law that deprived Waikato Tainui of all of their land in the first place. There was a piece of legislation that simply took all their land away from them. So to then say, oh, you can't have any political or legal objective as a charity seems to me to be quite an interesting assertion in a modern democracy. And we're very sad that we're not talking about the charitable purposes. Now, as I say, we have had a long time and given a lot of thought to how to make the current system work for us. It's not a hugely problematic issue for PSGEs, but it certainly is for some of the smaller charities that we work with, and that feedback we hear all the time. So just a word from our marae and smaller charities. So PSGE, we're an incorporated society. Our members are our marae, so we have 68 member marae into our incorporated society. So we speak for them as well when we're going to make this submission. They're much smaller than us, and they don't have people like you and me at their disposal. So they find this whole charities regime much more challenging than we do. It's too expensive, it's too difficult to maintain, it's too difficult to run. They don't have the capacity building, they're a volunteer, they're sitting at their kitchen table once a month on a Thursday with some other people trying to figure out how to run their charity. We don't want to see any additional regulation or fees imposed on those entities. We would like everything simplified for them, and we'd like them to get more of a hand. So we would say, there is a disquiet among this idea that the DIA are here to police the sector. I'd say you're here to support the sector, and we'd like you to be a little bit more forthcoming in your education and support role than your police role. Bluntly put. So that is the Te Ao Māori perspective, just from myself and from the Waikato Tainui perspective, and I hope that's been helpful for some of you.
Hello everybody, it's great to be here from across the ditch. I'd like to begin by just drawing your attention to 5 or 6 of the recommendations in our report. In 10 minutes I'm obviously not going to be able to cover very much, but what I've endeavoured to do through the course of this conference has been to listen to what the issues that are arising here are, and to some extent do a comparison with the issues that arose in Australia, pick out what I think are the key themes coming out of this conference, the discussions I've had with a lot of people since arriving on Tuesday night, and talk briefly about how, where I can, or where I think insights that might be useful are for you. So if I could say that in Australia, 3 issues emerged consistently in our review. For those, by the way, that would like to follow, just type in Strengthening for Purpose into your web browsers, and up should come the report. And you can go to recommendations 5, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13 are the ones I'm going to touch upon. In Australia, the 3 themes that came out were fundraising. Everywhere we went, there was such a high level of fundraising frustration. It was item 1, number 1 when we walked into a room. Now, I don't think that's such a big issue from the conversations I've had here in New Zealand, but in Australia it was. The second issue was the objects, and I think we could probably thank the ACNC for getting everyone a little bit excited about that. They asked for a couple of variations of the objects, and the sector decided it had some views which we managed to hear every time we walked into a room. And that probably was inflating an issue a bit above where it probably needed to be in the overall discussions and debates. The third was in relation to the national scheme. Because we have states, there's a high levels of complexity in relation to constitutionality questions, and those issues were permeating up in a variety of different ways. So when I come over here, I find a quite different prioritising of agenda items. What I've heard, rightly or wrongly, is really 2 or 3 key issues. Governance and how you get good governance has come up consistently in conversations with people. And the second one is the proper limits of governance and interventions, of which the last speaker just said, where should government be playing a controlling role or a supporting role? Those sorts of issues come out over and over again in conversations here. With the greatest of respect, I actually think that some of the issues that are coming up on this side of the ditch are probably the bigger issues at a really macro level than issues like fundraising, but you take what you give them and you go to do a review, as I'm sure those that are in the review process have discovered. Let me then start with how I think I can be helpful to you in relation to governance standards and some of the things that came up for us. We struggled a lot with governance because everyone knows that if you get good governance, you get great charities. If you get bad governance, you get lousy charities. So everybody wants great charities because of the impact of charities on society. The question is not the importance of governance, the question is how we get there. We, the Commonwealth Government, imposed 5 standards as a part of the process of establishing the ACNC, and part of our process was the discussion of those 5 standards. They were overlaid on the corpse law, and in some ways they're an attempt to summarise the corpse law and to try and state clearly what might be appropriate governance standards. We were consistently confronted with problems as we went from consultation to consultation. For example, the conflict of interest issues in relation to charities generally, but in relation to mutuals, are unbelievably complex. In the church context, a number of churches pointed out they already had governance standards at quite some sophisticated levels, and how those, which are sometimes statutory or sub-statutory regulations, interface was quite complex. We ultimately decided to recommend that the governance standards become a equivalent of a last resort, and if you can show that you had a governance standard that was being implemented, then the governance standards would kick in. But if you had your own governance standards tuned to purpose, that might be much, much better, because a number of state legislations actually had quite good governance standards, and I thought the mutuals ones in relation to conflicts of interest, for example, were very complex and very thoughtfully worked through. We recommended also that the word perceived, this was a Law Council of Australia recommendation, be taken out, because in fact the governance standards in Australia require perceived conflicts of interest also to be a disqualifying characteristic. That was unbelievably complicated. It's not in the corpse law, it's in no other standard of statutory thing. And we said, let's bring them back to consistency, so we struggled with an attempt to try and find some level of consistency. And lastly, we said that a criminal, in Australia there's a government standard that says the breach of a statute carrying a penalty of greater than 60 penalty units is a breach of a governance standard. We formed the view that if you breach a law, you should be punished for that law. You shouldn't also be then able to be punished for a breach of essentially the tax laws and the ACNC laws. We said, separate them out. If the ACNC wants to do that, take it out of the governance standards and make it in another place. But we thought that you should only be punished once for an offence, not potentially twice. So there's some of the issues that came up in our review. I thought it might be helpful if I offered a couple of personal comments. And I think that it might be possible, if you're looking at governance standards, to reduce them to 3. I've made the first comment on that slide first. But I think that governance standards actually bear upon 3 areas. I think the first one is there's a bundle of issues linked to the nature and character of the people that are in your leadership. I call that good governance, and I think that's focused on the character of the people on the board. Second issue is I think there's a bundle of issues linked around goals. That is that the charity has to be able to focus on and show how its outputs link to its charitable purpose. And thirdly, I think there's a bundle of duties linked to the rules which you operate within. Obviously it's the law, but also the LORE of the organisation, what are its uniquenesses and its duties to the people that it exists for. And I'm wondering if it's possible to reduce governance standards to 3 broad categories: good governance, good goals, and good guidelines. You've raised the issue of the colonisation of charities and what are the proper limits of government regulation. And I want to give you some encouragement in this regard. I think that we are struggling at the beginning of the 21st century to really emerge with a new body of law for the not-for-profit sector. I think that this is very much uncharted territory. And we have a body of law for commerce well structured around companies and around contracts and around transactions. We have well-established bodies of state law and family law to give us justice within a family context. We have well-established body of law in relation to government and proper limits on government power and administrative law, constitutional law and so on. And we're really trying hard to develop a body of law for the not-for-profit sector and what it should look like. And I think that one of the things that we struggle with in this space is just what does that body of law look like. And I'm going to suggest that some of the comments that it made around the role of government to support, to enable and to encourage charities are in fact a large part of what is at the centre of that body of law, that we really are, as a Western world at least, really trying to come to terms with what the body of law for the not-for-profit sector should look like. What is the proper limit of government regulation? I don't know the answer to that, but I think I can tell you where the outer flag is. I think that the outer flag is probably that it's not appropriate for the government to be able to take control completely of a charity. I think there's got to be some space, at least without reference to a court. So we recommended in our review that the government have the power to ban a person from being a director, but not the capacity to replace the person. We think that the capacity to replace the leadership should ultimately lie somewhere outside of government, because otherwise government can completely colonise the sector. So that's my personal view on where the limit is, but it's also a view that we expressed within our report, that that's probably the proper limit, but I haven't heard too much discussion around that in New Zealand as being a bigger issue, but we have done that in Australia. The last thing to say, and it builds from what I've just said, or the second last thing, was as much as possible to try and use carrots, not sticks. Miles talked about the use of the jiu-jitsu rather than the sumo wrestler approach to regulation. One of the things that we said in our report, and we really struggled with this, was we said that if there's no other factors in play, how high can we lift the lowest tier for reporting? I think there's still got a reporting, and we said there's still got a reporting for the low level, but how light can we make it? And we drew a line at $1 million. The government former levels was $250,000, and when we seriously looked at it, we thought a turnover of $1 million is not actually that much. And if you're doing nothing, you're not getting government funding, you're not sending funds to West Africa, or any of these other things, then why not look at how little we can impose a burden upon the sector rather than how much? And we drew a tier level at $1 million, means I'm out of time. $1 million, $1 million and up to $5 million. Lastly, there's been some interesting things done in the US where they've endeavoured to provide volunteer protection through the Reform Uniform Unincorporated Associations Act, and in Queensland and in other states we have civil liability protection. I think that's something you can think about. Generally though, use of carrots, not sticks. The function of this body of law is to enable them to encourage voluntary participation in giving. Thank you for your enormous privilege being here.